who you know and love, go through what he's going through, it's difficult, not to feel something.
That was the moment I knew I could never look at him the same way again. Those were the choked-up words of Malcolm-Jamal Warner when speaking about Bill Cosby, the man who had once been a spiritual father, a mentor, and the most important companion during his youth. That sentence echoed like a cut to the soul, a sign of the inner torment Warner had carried for years. Malcolm-Jamal Warner. The beloved youngest son, Theo Huxtable, in The Cosby Show, was once seen as the embodiment of childhood innocence across America. But in July 2025, he passed away suddenly at the age of 54 during a vacation in Costa Rica, leaving behind a wave of profound shock. Even more devastating, before his death, Warner made a rare candid confession. He revealed the final scene, the moment that drove him to sever all ties with Bill Cosby, a man who had once shone so brightly before collapsing under the weight of scandal. A bitter admission, a secret buried for years, had finally come to light. So what exactly was that final scene? Join us as we uncover the full story in today's video, and don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next explosive revelations. The golden years, a father-son bond on and off screen. As the 1980s marked the golden era of American television, millions of families gathered in front of their TV screens every Thursday night to welcome the Huxtable family into their homes. Among them was a teenage boy with bright eyes and a shy smile who quickly stole the hearts of audiences, Malcolm-Jamal Warner as Theo Huxtable. He walked onto the set of The Cosby Show at just 14 years old, unaware that his life was about to change forever, and that his relationship with Cliff Huxtable, played by Bill Cosby, would grow into something akin to a real father-son bond. What no one expected, however, was that this deep attachment would later become the source of Warner's most indescribable pain. From the very first episodes aired in September 1984, The Cosby Show exploded into success. The program not only brought gentle humor, but also portrayed an intellectual African-American middle-class family, Dr. Cliff Lawyer Claire, and their bright, mischievous children. Theo Huxtable, the only son, immediately became the mirror for millions of American teens. Warner, then a young actor with no experience, skyrocketed to fame through Theo. Just 2 years later, in 1986, he received an Emmy nomination at the age of 16, an extraordinary achievement for a black teen actor. What made his appeal so strong wasn't just raw talent, but the patient guidance of Bill Cosby. To Warner, Cosby wasn't merely a co-star. He was a mentor, a guide in the craft, even a model of manhood. In multiple interviews, Warner repeated, "He had a major influence on my life." On set, Cosby would call Malcolm "my son," teaching him how to control his voice, engage the audience, and most importantly, how to stay grounded in the face of fame. This relationship extended beyond work. It gave Warner the sense of safety and protection any teen entering the dazzling world of Hollywood would long for. The Cosby Show quickly became a cultural phenomenon. From 1985 to 1989, it consistently topped the Nielsen ratings with over 30 million households tuning in weekly. At its peak, one episode drew in 65 million viewers, nearly one-third of the entire U.S. population at the time. With such massive reach, Warner transformed from an unknown teen into America's son, affectionately called our Theo by fans. Wherever he went, people greeted him by his character's name, not his real one. Not only did audiences love him, but critics also praised Warner's natural and sincere acting. Theo was a mix of teenage awkwardness and endearing stubbornness. Cosby used to joke, "Malcolm doesn't need to act, he just needs to be himself." But Warner later revealed that Cosby often fine-tuned his performances, showing him how to pause before a punchline, when to let the audience laugh, and most importantly, how to listen to fellow actors rather than just waiting for his own lines. These lessons stayed with Warner for life. Outside the camera, Cosby cared for Warner like a real father. When he learned Warner was struggling in school due to a hectic filming schedule, Cosby hired a private tutor. He regularly spoke with Warner's mother to ensure her son wasn't being swallowed by the spotlight. At cast parties, Cosby would put his arm around Warner and proudly introduce him. "This is my son." For a young black teenager growing up in a racially tense America, being acknowledged by America's dad was a source of immense pride. Thanks to Cosby's influence, Warner learned discipline. While many child stars of his era spiraled into trouble, Warner maintained a clean image, focused on his studies, and even kept a solid GPA. "There was a time I had a 3.8 GPA," he proudly shared. And Cosby always pushed me to remember that school mattered just as much as acting. It was this mentorship that helped Warner avoid the pitfalls so many young Hollywood actors couldn't escape. Their close bond was also reflected in how Cosby encouraged Warner to branch out. When Warner expressed interest in music and directing, Cosby not only supported him, but gave him opportunities. In 1992, Warner began directing some episodes of The Cosby Show, becoming one of the youngest directors to ever work on a hit American sitcom. With Cosby's backing, Warner would go on to direct more projects, paving the way for his behind-the-scenes career. In the eyes of the public, the image of Cliff Huxtable embracing Theo on screen felt like a real family moment. Viewers sensed genuine warmth because the bond wasn't just acted, it was real. By the late 80s, at the peak of the show's success, Cosby and Warner appeared together at events, always smiling as if they truly were father and son. The media dubbed Cosby America's dad, and Warner the son loved by a nation. That on-screen father-son relationship became part of America's collective memory. Many black viewers shared how it was the first time they saw a family like theirs portrayed with dignity and success on television. And Theo, with his school struggles and teenage clashes with his father, was a relatable reflection of their own youth. Fractured faith. When a father-son image begins to break. If the 1980s and early 1990s painted a glowing portrait of Bill Cosby and Malcolm-Jamal Warner as the ideal father and son both on screen and off, the years that followed would unravel an entirely different story. That once celebrated bond didn't break overnight. It quietly eroded little by little under the weight of time and unimaginable change. Warner grew into adulthood and sought his own path, while Cosby, the father figure, descended a dark road that would end in scandal and disgrace. And somewhere at that painful crossroads, Warner's faith was shaken to its core. After The Cosby Show ended in 1992, the cast each moved on to build new careers. Warner, with early directing experience under his belt, ventured into various roles. Lead actor in Malcolm and Eddie, 1996-2000 television director, spoken word musician. He was determined to prove he wasn't just little Theo forever. But one thing became clear: Warner began appearing less and less with Cosby in public. While they'd often shared red carpets in the 80s, by the late 90s such moments became rare. At the time, media called it a natural distance, a son growing up and stepping out of his father's shadow. But in hindsight, that distance carried far more weight. The real storm began in 2005 when Andrea Constand publicly accused Bill Cosby of sexual assault. Though the case didn't progress far, it left a stain on Cosby's reputation. Warner stayed silent, continuing to focus on his own work. He didn't defend Cosby, but he didn't denounce him either. That silence was perhaps a sign of respect for his former mentor, or a glimpse into Warner's own private struggle. In 2014, the storm exploded. A stand-up routine by comedian Hannibal Buress went viral, calling Cosby a rapist, and unleashed a tidal wave of allegations. Over 60 women came forward with harrowing, decades-spanning stories. The America's Dad image collapsed almost instantly. Naturally, attention turned to those who had been part of The Cosby Show. What would they say? What could they say? By then, in his 40s, Warner faced a barrage of questions. In a 2015 interview with the Associated Press, he offered a short but telling response. It's painful to hear those stories. Because on one hand, I love the man, he was my mentor, my friend. But on the other hand, whenever a woman tells her story of assault, whether you believe it or not, the pain is real. That single quote laid bare the internal war. Warner couldn't erase what Cosby had done for him, yet he couldn't ignore the brutal truths told by the women. In an interview with Billboard that same year, Warner added, "I wasn't there when those things happened. I can only say that he treated me with nothing but kindness. And what he did for television for the black community is undeniable." It was an honest confession. Warner wanted to preserve the beautiful memories, yet was haunted by the moral weight of not fully standing with the victims. To him, Cosby had become two people, one the teacher who guided him, the other a fallen figure haunted by horrific actions. Those two personas tore at Warner's heart. It wasn't just his emotions that took a hit. His career felt the effects too. When networks pulled The Cosby Show from syndication, the entire cast lost significant residual income. Warner once remarked, "We were all affected, but thankfully I had other work lined up, so I wasn't hit too hard." Still, the pain was evident. A once proud cultural legacy had been tarnished. He feared that new generations wouldn't see the Huxtable family as a beacon, but rather as a memory corrupted by the sins of its patriarch. By 2017, when Cosby stood trial for the first time, Warner allowed himself to express the anguish he had long kept hidden. In one conversation, he teared up and admitted, "I can't pretend I'm okay. It breaks my heart." The same son who once beamed beside his television father was now publicly mourning the loss not of a person, but of an ideal. Warner's silence had finally given way to raw emotion. In the years that followed, Warner stayed mostly quiet. He avoided Cosby-related events and poured himself into his role on The Resident, into music, and into building a life outside the spotlight. But when asked, he never denied the complexity of the relationship. In a 2023 podcast with Jamel Hill, Warner said, "I can't defend him. I can't explain what he did. But I also can't just throw him out in the street." That statement, spoken just 2 years before his death, sounded like a closing note to a lifelong internal battle. From second father to heavy shadow, Cosby's place in Warner's life became a complicated mix of affection, betrayal, gratitude, and grief. Each time his name came up, Warner seemed to walk a tightrope between childhood memory and brutal reality. And it's that very tightrope that made their relationship a tragedy, not enough hate to cut ties, not enough faith to stay close. To outsiders, it was easy to wonder, why didn't Warner speak more forcefully? Why not condemn Cosby outright? But for Warner, the answer was never simple. He owed his career to Cosby, yet couldn't condone what he had done. It was a push and pull no clear statement could resolve. And that's why to this day people still ask, what was the moment that finally broke him? In the shadows of the scandal, Warner quietly retreated into his own world, carrying within him a fracture that would never truly heal. The father he once adored on screen had become a fallen symbol in real life. And the boy who once called him dad had become a man carrying that emotional wreckage. The father-son warmth that once comforted millions had for Warner become a wound that would never fully close. His faith had been shaken, and it would never return. Death in Paradise, the final tragedy. On July 20th, 2025, a shocking headline spread across news outlets and social media. Malcolm-Jamal Warner, once beloved across America for his role as Theo Huxtable in The Cosby Show, had died suddenly at the age of 54. According to an official statement from local police in Limon Province, Costa Rica, Warner drowned while vacationing with his family on the shores of Puerto Viejo, a region known for its soft white sands and crystal-clear waters. It was dubbed a death in paradise for the breathtaking beauty of the place where Warner took his final breath stood in cruel contrast to the sudden tragedy. Within hours of the announcement, social media erupted with millions of posts. Fans began sharing old clips of Warner on screen, the teenage son trading witty arguments with Cliff, the joyful banter in the Huxtable living room. Beneath each video, thousands of sorrowful comments piled up. "My childhood died with him. I can't believe Theo is gone." The collective sentiment was disbelief. Warner had been at the prime of his life, healthy, successful, happily settled. No one expected a holiday trip to become his final journey. Warner's former co-stars from The Cosby Show quickly responded. Felicia Rashad, who played Claire Huxtable, wrote on Twitter, "Malcolm was not just a colleague, he was my little brother. He lived with honesty, with love, and always put family first." Keshia Knight Pulliam, who portrayed youngest daughter Rudy, shared a behind-the-scenes photo. The Huxtable family gathered in laughter. "Malcolm was our quiet protector, the one who shielded us from the pressures of showbiz. He was our silent hero." The media also emphasized Warner's life as a model family man. Many retrospectives included images of him with his wife and young daughter, private but deeply loving. Warner was never one for scandal, never sought attention through controversy. That quiet dignity only deepened the public's respect for him. Some commentators called him the steady soul of The Cosby Show, unshaken by fame, devoted to his craft, and unwavering in his values. But amid the wave of grief, one statement sparked heated debate. Bill Cosby, Warner's on-screen father, issued a public condolence. In a handwritten message relayed through his legal team, Cosby referred to Warner as "my son" and praised him as a gifted artist and a man of great integrity, whom I was always proud of. At first glance, the words sounded touching, but for many they rang bitterly hollow. In truth, Warner and Cosby had been estranged for years following the scandal. Warner had kept his distance, Cosby engulfed in disgrace. To call him "my son" now in the wake of death only reminded people of the broken bond and amplified the pain of its falsehood. Editorials didn't hold back. Several pointed out that Cosby had forfeited the right to call himself father long ago, and that inserting himself into Warner's farewell was nothing short of salt in an open wound. One reader wrote, "Where was he when Malcolm was alive? What did he do when the scandal broke? Now he remembers he had a son too late." The condolence note became a lightning rod for public anger, a mirror of the complex legacy the two men left behind. This unexpected death pushed the entire narrative into its final tragic crescendo. Fans weren't just mourning a gifted actor or a childhood memory, they were grieving a life forever bound to the shadow of a fallen icon. Warner was no longer here to speak his full truth. But before he passed, he had shared enough bittersweet, honest, haunting reflections on Cosby. And in those final words, we may find the answer to the question that lingered for years: what exactly made him walk away from what once felt like the most sacred bond of all? Malcolm-Jamal Warner exposed the scene that made him cut off. Bill Cosby forever. Before his sudden passing at the age of 54, stunned all of Hollywood. Malcolm-Jamal Warner, best known as Theo from The Cosby Show, had left behind a series of reflections that forced the public to reassess his entire relationship with Bill Cosby. For many years, Warner remained silent, avoiding any direct comment. But as time passed, he could no longer keep the turmoil to himself. And through remarks scattered from 2015 to 2025, a final scene began to emerge, a painful moment that led him to cut all ties with Cosby permanently. From the moment Cosby's scandal erupted, Warner was in a uniquely difficult position. He wasn't just another actor from the show, he was Cosby's on-screen son, the one most intimately connected to the Cliff Huxtable persona. In 2015, when dozens of women came forward with accusations against Cosby, Warner was repeatedly asked for his opinion. He told Billboard, "Hearing those stories is painful. On one hand, he was a mentor, someone I loved. But on the other hand, when a woman speaks about the pain of being violated, you can't deny that it's real." With that statement, Warner stepped out of his comfort zone. He didn't deny the beautiful memories, but he refused to ignore the mounting evidence. In another interview that same year with the Associated Press, Warner emphasized that Cosby had done a lot of good for me, and that what he did for television for the black community is priceless. But just moments later he added, "The most painful part is seeing that legacy so deeply tarnished." These were the first signs that Warner no longer saw Cosby through a lens of unquestioning admiration. The on-screen father figure had become split into two opposing halves, one a source of inspiration, the other a man condemned by society. In 2017, when Cosby walked into a courtroom for the first time, Warner confessed to the press, "I can't pretend I'm okay. It breaks my heart." That brief statement hit like a shockwave. A man once known for keeping his balance had finally acknowledged his personal heartbreak. No longer hiding behind measured words, Warner admitted that the father figure he had once revered had shattered. And that realization hurt so deeply, he could only describe it as being broken. In the years that followed, Warner grew increasingly candid. On a 2023 podcast with Jamili Hill, he shared, "I can't defend him or explain his actions, but I also can't just throw him out on the street." The quote may sound conflicted, but it was in fact the deepest form of honesty. Warner no longer tried to maintain a neutral mask. He publicly stated that Cosby's behavior was inexcusable, while also admitting he couldn't erase the memories that had helped shape him. This was his most bitter admission. The father-son bond on screen had been severed, but the wound it left behind could never truly heal. Then came what Warner described as the turning point. In a rare encounter with Cosby following the outbreak of the scandal, Warner realized Cosby was only concerned with one thing: his reputation, and whether the show might ever return to syndication. Warner later recalled that he had waited for an apology, a sign of accountability, or at least some expression of empathy for the victims. But none came. All he heard were calculations about personal image. And in that moment, Warner understood, "I never really knew him." That was the final scene. Not a scripted episode, not a staged conversation, but a real-life moment where Warner saw the chasm between the image and the man. It forced him to walk away. No more fatherly bond, no more mentorship. Only the raw truth remained. For Warner, this realization was more devastating than any courtroom verdict, because it came from a relationship that had shaped his entire youth. Before his death, Warner made one point very clear: The Cosby Show still deserved to be honored. In an interview with People magazine, he said, "No matter what people think of the show, now I'm still proud to have been part of something that had a powerful impact on black culture and American culture as a whole." This wasn't an attempt to excuse Cosby, it was a deliberate distinction between the collective work of art and an individual's wrongdoing. Warner wanted the audience to remember the Cosby Show was not just Cosby. It was the result of the work of dozens of actors, writers, and directors, innocent people who had created a cultural landmark. That was Warner's final lesson. He reminded the public that gratitude does not mean blindness, and that love does not mean enabling wrong. By daring to speak the truth, even if it came late, and with pain, Warner freed himself from Cosby's shadow. Before closing his eyes forever, he chose truth, he chose justice, and he chose to live faithfully to his own heart. Legacy and lesson. The sudden death of Malcolm-Jamal Warner at the age of 54 not only left fans in mourning, but also brought final closure to the long and painful relationship between him and Bill Cosby. Before his passing, Warner shared honest reflections, revealing the final scene that forced him to sever ties with his on-screen father, the moment he realized Cosby cared more about preserving his reputation than showing remorse. Those words became a kind of spiritual will. Warner didn't choose silence, nor did he resort to harsh condemnation. He preserved the beautiful memories of The Cosby Show but refused to excuse the wrongdoing. "No matter what people think, I'm still proud to have been part of a show that deeply impacted black culture," he said. It was a clear line. The collective legacy deserved to be honored, but personal mistakes had to face justice. For Warner, The Cosby Show was both a source of pride and a lasting wound. On one hand, it opened doors for a generation of black Americans to finally see themselves represented on television. On the other, the Cosby scandal tainted that entire legacy. Warner understood that for younger generations, the Huxtable family might be nothing more than a broken fairy tale. But rather than reject it entirely, he chose to hold on to the good and acknowledge the darkness. That too became Warner's greatest message. Gratitude does not mean denial. Love does not require blindness. He chose truth, painful as it was, to protect his own integrity. And with that courage, Warner turned the final scene into more than a farewell to Cosby. He made it a lesson for society at large. Sometimes cutting ties is the only way to stay true to your own heart. Today, when people remember Malcolm-Jamal Warner, they don't just recall the innocent Theo Huxtable, they remember a man who had the courage to face the truth. His true legacy lies not only in the sitcom that once made America laugh, but in the way he lived, holding on to what was good, letting go of what was wrong, and allowing truth to echo even beyond death. If Malcolm-Jamal Warner's story truly touched your heart, don't forget to leave a comment and share your thoughts. Hit like to show your support. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next videos. Every week, we'll continue bringing you untold stories, behind-the-scenes truths, heartbreaks, and powerful lessons from the hidden corners of Hollywood.